much everything on the 308 has been custom in some fashion. Not a single part on this car has been off the shelf. None of it is meant for a Ferrari. But sometimes there's not even a part that exists that you can repurpose for your build. In this case, I need a hood vent, a heat extractor from our radiator out of our hood on the front of the car. Problem is, there's nothing out there that's going to fit. So I've been forced to make my own. The only problem is I'm not really great at welding aluminum. I'm not a panel guy and I'm not a body guy, so I'm totally out of my element. I have sunk about 40 hours into this project so far, and honestly, I'm not even sure it's going to turn out good enough to actually use as a finished part. But I'm not afraid of failure because it's in those failures that we learn the most. I'm learning a ton on this one. It has by far been the most challenging thing I've probably ever done on a project like this. I'm having fun with it though, most of the time, when I'm not really pissed off. I don't know, we'll talk about it. Let's dive into the project. For this one, we've got to rewind back to September of last year because that's when this hood vent project initially began. If you've been watching since then, you'll probably remember when we cut a huge hole in our original aluminum Ferrari hood for use with a carbon fiber hood vent that we then planned to duct to the radiator itself. The overall goal was to maximize our cooling efficiency and to help the aerodynamic profile of the car by generating as much downforce as possible. The added aesthetic is a bonus as well. A vent in the middle of the 308 hood has it looking a lot more like one of my favorite cars of all time, the F40 LM. Our first carbon hood vent did look really good, but the problem was there was no effective way to duct from it to the radiator while maintaining good flow characteristics. It was simply the wrong shape and profile for what we needed it to do. That didn't come as a surprise because it was a universal part, and this is anything but a universal project. So we went back to the drawing board to design our own. A few weeks later, we began the design process, and this time around, we approached it in the correct order. We went from the radiator to the hood, designing a duct that would have good flow characteristics and would mate the two in one fluid shape. I did my fair share of internet research to make sure we were following proper design principles so that we would maintain a Venturi effect once this part is done. After all, the idea is that the air flowing over the top of the car helps suck air through the cooling system at the front. The finished cardboard template looked really good, but that was the easy part. Then came actually building this thing out of aluminum panels. It wasn't until January that I picked this part of the project back up. Using 60 and 80 thousandths thick 5000 series alloy sheet metal, I got to work making some of the parts that we would need to build this thing. I don't have a ton of experience working with aluminum sheet, but having good templates made this job at least somewhat straightforward. It was just a process of removing bits of material slowly but surely until everything fit together just the way that it should. Because I didn't have any traditional sheet metal forming tools, I did have to find my own path, but after a bit of time, the 3 panels that we did make turned out pretty well. It took a bit of finessing, but we got all of our edges and gaps to line up, which is admittedly critical when it comes to welding sheet metal aluminum parts. But with the 2 sides and the front edge done, that's where I stopped. I ran out of material to do the big curved back piece and the front top inside panel, and I knew that from this point forward it was going to be a huge challenge, and I think subconsciously I put it off for as long as I could. It's one thing to tape all the panels into place like you see here, but it's another entirely to weld it all together. But that's where we are now, and at this point, this hood duct represents one of the most daunting challenges left on finishing this 308, but it's also one of the most necessary. To get started today, we've got to remove the hood from the 308 and get it prepared for welding. One of the core tenets of welding aluminum is that it must be free from every impurity possible, so we've got our work cut out for us as we work to remove the original yellow paint. Any impurities in the metal will be very quick to react the second we pass the welder's arc over it. But because we're working with thin sheet aluminum that's 40 years old, this is a delicate balance of removing only the surface contaminants like paint and body filler, and not any of the material itself. The thinner it gets, the more difficult this will be to weld, and I need all the help I can get. But cleaning the top side is only half of the job. We've got to get rid of all of the paint on the back side of the hood as well, because this material is thin enough that as soon as we get full penetration with the welder, any contaminants on this backside will immediately come through. To my inexperienced eyes, this looks like as good a starting point as any. So we're going to get our first few pieces fitted and tacked into place. The piece that I want to start with is the 3/4 inch flange that will be at the front leading edge of the hood. The only problem is I've got to figure out how to hold it into place because obviously magnets aren't going to work. My first idea was to use tape, and in retrospect that was admittedly pretty stupid. But it only played a small role in me figuring out just how difficult this was about to be. Watch closely at the weld arc. And here's a replay. The second I began welding and introducing heat to this panel, it buckled. And yeah, my tape melted immediately and didn't hold my piece in place anymore, but that's a solvable problem. What I didn't know how to overcome was how to keep this panel from excessively warping as I weld the entire perimeter of this hood duct. But one problem at a time, let's take some baby steps. If I even wanted the opportunity to warp this thing beyond recognition by welding it, I needed to get that front flange held into place. I machined some small spacers to go behind it and clamped the entire assembly together with a series of clamps, and this turned out to work quite well. It held it firmly in place, and most importantly, it retained that nice corner joint that we want to fill with weld. And to clarify, you'll notice that the two aluminum panels meet at a 90-degree angle, but they don't overlap one another. This will give us the best and strongest possible weld joint, and it'll give us the most material to work with if we actually want to finish this edge to a nice 90 degrees with something like a file or a grinder. Now, as much as I wish I could say this went smoothly, it was anything but. I'm not one to throw things when I get upset, but this was so frustrating that I actually chucked my filler rod in anger. So let's talk about it. Now, I know this is going to sound whiny and complainy because it is, but I figured I should share the highs and the lows of this build because, I don't know, that's how this stuff goes sometimes. But realistically, right now, I am just furious. This is not working. I have welded maybe 3 inches of this hood so far. There's probably 200 inches of welding in front of me, and I'm already like, I want to quit. I'm just blown through the material. I'm having contamination problems. I don't know whether it's not clean enough, if it's the aluminum the hood is made of, or realistically it's probably just my own skill set, but this is going horribly and I want to stop. But I know that stopping isn't going to get the project done, and this is something that I know I need to see through, so I'm going to persevere. But I figured this was an opportunity to hopefully at least give you guys a laugh at my expense, or to show how this stuff actually goes. Sometimes it's not always smooth sailing. This is a total disaster at the moment. This sucks, but let's keep going. Clearly, there is a reason that people say you need to clean, and then clean, and then clean again before you can weld aluminum effectively. I think I was running into a lot of contamination issues on top of the fact that I'm new to this. I've never welded aluminum this thin in any circumstance. The entirety of my aluminum welding experience is documented in this build series, and you've seen all of it, so to say I struggled here is an understatement. But after a number of hours of trying, I did feel like I was finally getting somewhere. I wouldn't say that it's good, nor would I say it's pretty, and I am certain that I warped the panel quite a bit doing it, but at least it's forward progress and it's going a lot better than it was a few hours ago. With the leading edge fully welded and both side panels tacked into place, I decided it was smart to put the assembly back in the car before I do anything further. I thought that it might be kind of helpful to weld the sides of this thing in situ, but it turns out that was a bad idea as well. As soon as I felt like I had found my groove, it was all falling apart once again. So I powered through that first piece, and it went not bad. It's fine. I'm okay with it. I think it should be clean-up-able, if that's a word. Moved on to the next one. It's going a lot worse. It looks a lot more like that first bad section that I had. I mean, it's kind of working. This is going to require a lot of work. I'm really making a mess of this thing. And all I'm trying to tell myself at this point is that at least I tried. I don't know. It kind of sucks, but... To keep everything straight and in line, I wound up busting out a lot of clamps, weights, tools, you name it. There were plenty of instances where the welding went just fine, but plenty that were nothing but a struggle. But eventually I got 3 of the 4 top sides welded and decided it was time to try finishing the edges and see what we're really working with. I can't say that it was the right tool for the job, but my tool of choice in this case was my trusty die grinder, some sanding discs, and that deburring wheel for some final material removal. I don't want to go too far, so we're going to need to go over this with a sanding block and some files, not to mention the fact that I still haven't finished the corners, and there are a lot of spots that still need some additional weld to fill in some deep pockets and marks. But it's something. I don't even know if it's a good something, I couldn't really tell you, but it's something. And with that, we're on to the curved back piece, the most important part of the entire duct. We still have the template from the beginning of the episode, so now it's just a matter of seeing how well it still fits now that most of this is made out of metal. Thankfully, it fits reasonably well, so we just need to cut it out and get to work making it fit. We've got our template in this thing for the final piece, that back big curved piece, and I've just realized I don't have material on hand big enough to make it, which is pretty frustrating. I asked some buddies around, see what they have. All I can find is 6000 series aluminum alloy, which is good stuff, but it doesn't hold a bend at all. I've tried everything I can come up with here in the shop in order to get it to bend, including ratchet strapping it to a tire, and it just springs back, it goes straight. The only thing I can do is bend it in the brake in a small series of bends, but it leaves lines on it, and I'm not really content with that as a solution. So I feel like I'm just spinning my wheels again. This isn't working. I just want to get this done. Whether it comes out well or not, at least it'll be done and I can move on to the next thing and come up with a different solution or cross it off the list. One of the two. But anyways, enough talking. I'll catch you guys tomorrow when the metal supply store opens and we can get this back piece done, hopefully. And so I found some 5000 series sheet at the local metal supplier. I'm realizing now it probably would have been better to use something even softer, but this is what I had. So I traced out our template, made some minor changes for symmetry, and got to cutting it out. As hoped, it only took minimal massaging, mainly on the back two radius corners, in order to get this panel to fit the way that we want it to. However, I still don't have an effective way of putting the large radius bend in it, so we're going to tack one into place and do the rest of the work a little bit at a time. I used several big clamps to hold everything into place and worked my way stitch welding up the side of the panel as I bent it inch by inch. I know this isn't the ideal way to do it, but it's the best method I could come up with, and the end result does seem to have worked rather well. It took a lot of force to get the last bit of bend in it, having to pry against the base of the hood itself, but ultimately, it's looking pretty good. With both curved panels stitch welded into place, it's time to put the hood back on the front of the 308 so we can step back and get an idea of how it's going to look and whether or not it's going to work. From a functionality standpoint, I have no fears at all, but from a fit and finish standpoint, it's anyone's guess. So I'll start by saying I am quite happy with how it's shaping up. I know it's far from perfect and there is still a lot of work left to do, but at minimum, it's at least looking like what we set out to build, and that's worth something. There's a simultaneous sense of pride in all of the work that I've put into this thing, paired with a sense of disappointment in that it might not be good enough. Let me do my best to explain my thoughts. So at this point, there's probably a few different reactions. I'd like to imagine a lot of you guys are looking at this and saying, dude, that looks sick, I love it. Or even if you don't like it, you think that it turned out well. But then there's probably some of you guys that really know what you're looking at that might think the same, or you might be looking at it and saying, Mike, good try, but the fit and finish isn't quite there for professional body work. And I'm okay with that. I'm not a professional body guy, I'm not a sheet metal guy, so on and so forth. But in the intro, I said, I'm not even sure this thing is going to be good enough to use as a finished part. And that's because I don't know if once I kind of body work the whole thing and get it sorted and hammer and dolly it and weld it all up, will it look good enough for me to be happy with it? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm proud of what I've done. I put a lot of work into this and I think that it looks really cool, but my standards for the finished car might be beyond my own skill set. So let's take a closer look at the details of this thing, and I want to show you guys some of my concerns. Hopefully we can sort them out. I'm going to buy a hammer and dolly set, and we're really going to try to make this thing work, but it might not. I don't know. We'll have to find out. So I said I am really happy with how this thing looks. I think it looks really cool. The overall shape of it should function really well. It's nice and centered. The only problem really comes from the fit and finish of it, and I can highlight all of that with a ruler, or in this case, a straight edge. If we hold it up to the edges that I've welded and then broken over, you can kind of see we've got low spots in the middle, You can see there's a gap on the straight edge versus it makes contact out at the sides. You can kind of see the same thing if we put a straight edge across the top of the hood. We've got a low spot in the middle or a high spot out on the end. And some of that's going to be from the fact that we're welding aluminum. That's just kind of a natural thing that it's going to do, and it's thin sheet metal. I talked to Ryan over at Crucible Coachworks, and he let me know that a hammer and dolly should be able to move a lot of this stuff and make it work. I really don't know because I've never done it before. I've never even touched a dolly. But I just know that I want to get these edges straightened out, and I want this whole hood vent to work really well. I mean, obviously there's a lot of work left to do. I haven't really finished the corners. There's some welding. There's marks in here that we need to come in, and if you kind of get down and look at the edge here, I mean, it looks decent, but as you can see, it really is pretty loosely bodywork. We've got a lot of stuff left to do. And what I don't want to do is come in and make this all perfect by using body filler, because we're really going to be handling this hood a lot. It's going to come on and off, and body filler I don't think will hold up. I think this thing will flex too much. We're going to drive it hard on track, and I don't want cracking body filler after spending a bunch of money on paint. Now, if this thing were pure race car and I didn't really care that much about aesthetics, this would be good enough. I can definitely make this work. It's going to function really well, and it looks pretty sweet. I don't need to worry about the details, but I'm putting so much time and money into this car that I don't want to paint this and have wiggly edges on my hood vent. I want this thing to be perfect, right? Or as at least close as I can muster. And so I want to put that time in, I want to get as close as we can, and if it turns out I can't shape this thing good enough, well, then we'll start looking at body working it with body filler and then making a carbon mold and making it out of carbon. I mean, obviously that'd be the ideal scenario anyway, but that's expensive, and if we don't have to do it, I'm not going to worry about it right now. We could save that for the future. Okay, so enough of the hood for a moment. Let's move on to another project that's pretty important to getting this car complete. We've got to get rear axles in this thing if we want to have any chance of ever driving it, and they're the last major component of the drivetrain. In the last episode, I showcased the fact that our rear uprights don't actually have a pass-through for an axle. They weren't ever meant to be used in the back of a car. If we take a look at the back of these parts, you can get an idea of what exactly we need. There is a steel panel covering the back of our upright, and lurking behind it would be the splined input for the wheel hub itself. This is what drives the wheels forward. The upright is empty inside and does have a hole on the face for the hub to mount to it, so the job at hand is to open up a hole on the backside that matches the diameter of the front. So I took things over to Nimmo Machine, where my buddy Brett said he'd help me out with this job instead of me trying to tackle this with something like a hole saw. He made a register on the rotary table, did some fit and finish work with a file, and got us all set up so that we can get this thing effectively machined with as much clearance as possible. I've said it before, but Brett always has a solution for any problem that I bring to him, and this one is no exception. With everything set up and clamped down, it's time to actually machine these parts. Now, some of you will note that end mills are not meant for drilling holes, so Brett moved the end mill back and forth in light passes so that we could fully penetrate the top surface before we make a round cut. From there, it's as simple as turning the rotary table 360 degrees twice over. Once for a rough cut, and then once with 60 thousandths more clearance for a finish pass. When I asked how quickly we can turn the rotary table, Brett let me know that a great rule of thumb is to identify the color of the chips that the machine is leaving behind. A light straw color is ideal. If we're getting blue or purple, we're cutting too fast. After I asked plenty of questions and watched Brett machine the first, he passed the controls over to me and allowed me to machine the second. And this is something I'm always appreciative that Brett does. He's always willing to take the time to teach me what he's doing anytime I take something to him. While I am far from being a machinist, it's nice to have little tidbits and lessons under my belt. As you might have guessed, the finished part has two big holes in it. As mentioned prior, we machined the opening as large as we possibly could. Any bigger and we'd start removing structural integrity from this thing. But for those worried about how strong it is now, worry not, it's still heavy gauge steel with some crazy load capacity. With the hub in place, we can finally see what this assembled unit is going to look like and what we need to accomplish with the axle itself. This, of course, is the Corvette outer CV joint, and it's what needs to clear the hole that we've cut in the back of the upright. It's been a guessing game up to this point as to whether or not it will actually fit, and now it's time to find out. Now, I know there's a lot of talking in this episode. If you don't like it, just deal with it, fast forward, I don't care. I want to talk about the uprights and where I'm at with them. We've got our hole cut in it, and it looks good from a functionality standpoint. I have no qualms with structural integrity. This thing is still insane, overbuilt. It could go on a trophy truck. The problem is that hole looks pretty small now that I'm looking at the axle itself. If we look at the size of the CV joint on the axle, it's big. And if it doesn't clear this hole, that's gonna be a massive setback. We're gonna have to redesign this part, probably have it cut out of billet aluminum while retaining the same geometry so that all of our other stuff doesn't change. That would set us back probably a couple of months and a lot of money. And unfortunately, seeing these parts here on the workbench, I'm not feeling so great about it. I don't think that it's gonna work. I'm kind of bumming. I've been dreading this for the past couple of days. But it's the moment of truth, so let's put it together and see how it works out. All right, following the past few days of working with aluminum and having it kick my butt, this is rewarding. It clears, it's got room to spare. I think I got really, really lucky. This is fantastic. Best news in a long time. The good news here is now we know that C5 Corvette outers fit. We obviously know that Honda inners are gonna fit, so over the weekend we will probably cut some axles up, sleeve them, make some temporary axles so that we can get some accurate measurements and get some custom orders axled. I think I'm gonna be going to the drive shaft shop, but I'm open to recommendations if you guys have any. Axles are the last thing we need in order to power the wheels, which is pretty exciting. This is sick, I'm stoked. So I think that is a good high note. We're gonna wrap this episode there. What a place to end. Lots of really good progress in my opinion. I know it's just 2 jobs for 1 episode, but 2 huge milestones in my opinion. That hood duct I have been dreading for so long, and while there's still a lot of work yet to do on it, it's coming out. At least I can be proud of it. I am proud of what I've done, even if it's not gonna work as an end piece. We'll make it work in some fashion, even if we've got to body work it and make it out of carbon. This working, this is the last piece of the drive line. This is fantastic. I'm so stoked. Thank you again, Brett, for helping me out with this one. I don't know, we'll see what we get done over the weekend. I got a lot of parts to design. We got to send some parts out to get cut. We really are like rounding the final corners here. I'm feeling pretty excited. So hope you guys are too. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of the episodes. Your support means a bunch to me. I'll catch you guys next week. I'll see you then.